Of the Federal Communications Commission. As is our tradition, if you'll please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, would you please introduce this morning's agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 9 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would modernize the FCC's licensing process for the 21st century. Second, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would facilitate more intensive use for upper microwave spectrum. Third, you will consider a second report and order and second further notice of proposed rulemaking on protecting against national security threats through equipment authorization program. Fourth, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking that would support and accelerate the nation's ongoing voluntary market-based broadcast television transition to next-gen TV. Fifth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking on advancing IP interconnection and accelerating network modernization. Six, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking on empowering broadband consumers through transparency. Seventh, you will consider a further notice of proposed rulemaking and public notice on advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls and the dismissal of outdated or otherwise moot robocall petitions. Eighth, you will consider a report and order, order on reconsideration, and notice of proposed rulemaking on incarcerated people's communication services and implementation of the Martha Wright Reed Act. Ninth, you will consider a direct final rule that would move to delete approximately 400 primarily wireless-related rules and requirements. This is your agenda for today. Today's first item is titled Space Modernization for the 21st Century and will be presented by the Space Bureau. Jay Schwartz, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Schwartz, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Hope you're having a pleasant space month.
So far, so good.
Yeah. With me at the table is Space Bureau Attorney Advisor Brandon Padgett, and he will present our first item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Today, the Space Bureau is pleased to present an item to overhaul and modernize the Commission's space and Earth station licensing process to ensure that new space-based industries, space exploration capabilities, and cutting-edge defense systems are pioneered in America. The item before you would propose to develop a licensing assembly line to expeditiously route space licensing applications. This new process would provide greater predictability and flexibility for applicants and, like actual assembly lines, accelerate space and Earth station review processes while improving the quality of the Commission's space licensing work. This notice would propose to replace Part 25 of the Commission's rules with Part 100, delete unnecessary and outdated rules, and organize new rules in a manner that is easier to understand. Additionally, it would propose to build an expedited licensing framework, modify processing round procedures for NGSO space stations, modify the bond requirement and remove it for certain NGSO systems, to extend license terms for most space and Earth stations to 20 years, to expand the number of modifications that applicants can make without prior approval, to shift to a predominantly nationwide blanket licensing approach for Earth stations, and to require space station operators to share space situational awareness data. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Gomez.
This is an ambitious item, that I'm glad to see the Space Bureau present. Today we continue to improve our licensing processes to keep up with the fast pace of innovation and deployment in the space sector. We've been hard at work on improving our processes since the creation of the Space Bureau and the rollout of the Transparency Initiative, and with this item we take a very meaningful step. This NPRM represents a change of culture for our agency. We would go from a bespoke process to a more efficient, applicant-friendly factory line that is focused on processing applications quickly and reaching decisions expeditiously, all while balancing the public interest. So I look forward to hearing from stakeholders on what they think about our new proposed approach. I also want to acknowledge the hard work that the Space Bureau staff did, not just for your effort to propose, the effort you propose to take on today, but for the work you've done over the decades at this agency, long before the Bureau existed, to ensure we keep pace with innovation and the demands of space. Now get ready. Are we going to need to staff up? Thank you to the Office of the Chair for working with my office on edits to this item, and Space Bureau, great work on an ambitious item.
Thanks. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. Today's action marks a major leap forward for the FCC and for America's leadership in the next frontier of communications in space. With the release of the Space Modernization Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the Commission is reimagining how we license space and Earth stations, shifting from the legacy Part 25 framework to a bold, streamlined system under new Part 100. This proposal reflects a modern vision for how government can enable innovation rather than slow it down. Our proposed licensing assembly line replaces a patchwork of outdated rules with a modular, transparent, and predictable process designed to move at the speed of today's space economy. By focusing on performance-based, bright-line standards and tying approvals to clear public interest principles like interference prevention, spectrum efficiency, safety, and national security, the Commission is building a framework that is both fast and responsible. This effort is about unleashing U.S. ingenuity. It gives operators flexibility to design, modify, and scale systems without getting bogged down in red tape. It supports new missions, from traditional satellite constellations to lunar operations and in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. By extending licensing terms and reforming burdensome bond requirements as well, we're giving American innovators the runway they need to succeed. Modernizing our space rules is not just regulatory reform. It's a competitiveness strategy. Other nations are racing to attract space investment, and the U.S. must lead to capture first-mover advantages in this domain. With this NPRM, we are taking a decisive step toward a more efficient, dynamic, and secure space licensing regime that keeps the United States at the forefront of the global space economy. I look forward to working with my colleagues, industry, and other stakeholders as we bring this vision into life. I also want to thank the Space Bureau for its excellent work on this item. The technical expertise and forward-looking approach of this item continues to position the United States as a global leader in space policy and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Last year, I had the chance to visit the Gundo, an industrial neighborhood full of old warehouses. You never know what's going to be a laugh line around here. That sits in Los Angeles County's South Bay region, right next to LAX. It's now home to some of America's most cutting-edge space and satellite entrepreneurs. But the truth is that manufacturing and productivity is nothing new for El Segundo. The aerospace industry's roots run deep in the area. In fact, the space race of the 1960s traces its course right through the region. Back then, the area played a central role in the aerospace manufacturing and innovation that powered America's Cold War leadership. It's where some of the largest and most important titans of the space industry first set up shop. From Douglas Aircraft, Northrop, Hughes Aircraft, to the founding of the Aerospace Corporation. Those businesses helped ensure that the U.S. won that space race. Now, in many ways, past is prologue. Today, the U.S. sits at the dawn of a new golden age of space innovation. And President Trump has been clear. The U.S. will dominate once again. America's leadership in space could not come at a better time. That's because we are now in the midst of what I refer to as a space race 2.0. And like the space race of 60 years ago, the U.S. is going to rely on the innovators like the ones all across El Segundo to help power America to the win. Now, I had the chance to visit the Gundo again a few weeks ago. When I did, I took a tour of Apex Space at their satellite manufacturing facility. Now, last year when I was there, the Apex warehouse was empty, except for a lot of dust and a little bit of rust. This time, a lot had changed. It was clean room compliant, and they were churning out satellite platforms. It's emblematic of the fast-paced changes we're seeing across the space economy. And it's why I chose the Apex production facility as the place to kick off our Space Month at the FCC. One of the core objectives of the FCC's Build America agenda is boosting America's space economy. Our efforts on this front are driven by a few guiding principles: speed, simplicity, security, and satellite spectrum abundance. And thanks to the Space Bureau, we've made incredible progress on all those fronts already. But the truth is, we're just getting started. And that's where this Space Month comes in. Now is the time for the FCC to add rocket fuel to our efforts. We're going to go big to make sure that the U.S. is the friendliest regulatory environment in the world for space innovators and entrepreneurs like Apex and so many other great U.S. businesses. So today's space modernization item is the centerpiece of Space Month. We propose to overhaul the FCC's licensing processes to match the scale and dynamism of today's space economy. Through an aggressive set of rules designed from a first principles perspective, we propose to replace our legacy default to no mindset with a default to yes framework built on permissionless innovation. We plan to do away with bespoke licensing processes in favor of a licensing assembly line. We intend to set out bright line rules about the kinds of applications that serve the public interest, as well as simplifying applications, establishing clear timelines, and increasing flexibility for licensed operations. For all their really big efforts on this item, I want to thank the whole team, Gregory Koutros, Clay DeSalle, Carolyn Mahoney, Stephanie Neville, Brandon Paget, Sankar Prasad, Janine Poltonero, Jay Schwartz, of course, as well, all in the Space Bureau. Thank you for your work on the item. And with that, we will proceed to a vote. Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee.
Approve.
The chair votes yes as well. Had to think about that for a second. Well, we got like aye, we've got yes, we've got approve. I don't really like aye. It sounds like a pirate, Yeah. So, all right, the chair votes approve. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is titled Upper Microwave Flexible Use Service and will be presented by the Space Bureau. Once again, Jay Schwartz, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Schwartz, continuing with the Space Month, please proceed.
Thank you. With me at the table now from Space Bureau is Jake Ream, and he's going to talk about our second item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Today, the Space Bureau is pleased to present an item designed to encourage more intensive use of upper microwave spectrum. Specifically, this notice of proposed rulemaking seeks comment on potential mechanisms for facilitating use of several spectrum bands at 24 gigahertz and above, UMFA spectrum, that are shared between the terrestrial upper microwave flexible use service, UMFAS, and the fixed satellite service, FSS, pursuant to criteria set forth in Section 25.136 of the Commission's rules. First, the item seeks comment on how the Commission might replace the Section 25.136 criteria with a light licensing approach. Specifically, it asks questions regarding the establishment of a common, automated, database-driven framework pursuant to which FSS Earth stations and fixed wireless base stations using UMFA spectrum would register sites. Next, the item asks whether, if the current Section 25.136 criteria were to remain in place, the Commission should allow UMFAS licensees and FSS operators to enter into voluntary agreements that would promote more intensive use of UMFAS spectrum. Finally, the notice seeks comment on potential revisions to the criteria and showings contained in Section 25.136. The Bureau recommends adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits.
Thank you for the presentation. We will now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. The work of the FCC as a spectrum manager of commercial spectrum is to facilitate the use of spectrum and to continuously calibrate how this scarce resource can be best utilized. In 2016, we determined that the UMFS bands would offer a great option to support terrestrial 5G service, so we auctioned licenses for terrestrial use. Now that we are seeing a surge in demand for satellite uses, we look to the UMFS bands again. The proposals in this NPRM present good options to help us create opportunities to maximize the use of spectrum. I am partial to a market-based approach that allows licensees to reach agreements with interested users to access spectrum the license holder is no longer utilizing. I think a market-based approach protects the integrity of the licenses we auction and assures bidders of the stability of the rules we set. However, I do look forward to hearing from all stakeholders on the options presented in this NPRM. Thank you to the Office of the Chairman for incorporating my suggestions, and thank you to the Space Bureau for your work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thank you. Today's NPRM marks another important step forward in modernizing the FCC's spectrum policies to keep pace with the rapid growth of the space economy. Nearly a decade ago, the FCC adopted rules governing how Earth stations could be sited in the UMFS bands. Since then, the communications landscape has changed dramatically. Demand for spectrum from the satellite sector has surged as new constellations, technologies, and services have come online, connecting people and powering innovation around the globe. This NPRM recognizes that progress and seeks to ensure our rules reflect today's marketplace realities. By examining ways to reform and streamline our Earth station siting and licensing framework, the FCC can help enable more intensive and efficient use of the UMFS bands. That means reducing regulatory friction, unlocking new opportunities for spectrum sharing, and promoting investment in next-generation satellite networks that complement our nation's 5G and future 6G wireless systems. As we look ahead, collaboration among industry, innovators, and federal partners will be critical in advancing our goal of maximizing the value of our spectrum resources while preserving flexibility for both terrestrial and space-based operations. Today's NPRM is a step forward toward a balanced, forward-looking approach, one that ensures American leadership in space and spectrum innovation remains second to none. I thank the Space Bureau for its thoughtful work on this item and its continued leadership in advancing policies that strengthen America's position in the global space economy. Today's NPRM will help ensure our spectrum rules remain as dynamic and innovative as the industries they support. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Starting with our Space Month agenda this October, we will be thinking more ambitiously and revisit our rules from first principles to ensure that America is the regulatory forum of choice for space innovators. With this item, we apply that big picture thinking to cut red tape that's throttled satellite infrastructure builds. Over the last few years, it's become clear that infrastructure reforms are needed to help make more productive use of satellite spectrum, specifically in what we refer to as the upper microwave band, or UMFUs for the initiated. Our current siting restrictions for these airwaves are already outdated and were established before the current wave of new satellite operations really got underway. So with today's item, we will now propose a wide range of reforms, potentially to streamline our siting rules so that satellite Earth stations can use these UMFUS bands more productively. We view these efforts as a win-win, not zero-sum. We're confident that the changes we propose in this item will help Earth stations and 5G terrestrial operators use these frequency bands more intensively while living side by side in their operations. For their outstanding efforts on this item, I want to thank the team, some of the same from the prior effort, George Koutros, Franco Hinosa, Carrie Murray, Jake Ream, and Chief Schwartz from the Space Bureau for all your work on it. It has my support. And we will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Gomez.
I think we need to harmonize how we say UMFS.
I know. It's UMFS. What do you say? Well, let's defer to you. What do you want it to be?
I have always said UMFS, but some people say UMFS.
Okay, let's go UMFS.
Approved.
I would bang the gavel to make it official, but I'm worried that my gavel is out of the meeting, so I can't do that.
I did say it.
You did approve, okay. Commissioner Trustee?
Approved.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 3 on your agenda is titled Protecting Against National Security Threats Through the Equipment Authorization Program and will be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology. Andrew Hendrickson, Acting Chief of the Office, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Hendrickson, when you are ready, please proceed.
I will proceed. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. On behalf of the Office of Engineering and Technology, I am pleased to present for your consideration second report in order, second further notice of proposed rulemaking. These actions represent the next critical steps in strengthening our equipment authorization program to safeguard the nation's communications networks and supply chains. If adopted, the proposals in this item would advance the Commission's national security objectives by updating and seeking comment on our rules governing equipment authorization and marketing. The goal is clear: to ensure that our networks remain protected from equipment that poses unacceptable risks. Joining me at the table is Jamie Coleman, Associate Chief, who has led and coordinated the cross-bureau team responsible for developing this item. She'll now walk us through the details. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Adoption of the second report in order and second further notice of proposed rulemaking before you would provide new rules governing equipment authorization and marketing, and seek further comment on various additional actions to further the Commission's goals of protecting our communications networks and supply chains from equipment that poses an unacceptable risk to national security. Since 2022, the Commission's Equipment Authorization Program rules include prohibitions on authorization of equipment that poses unacceptable risks to national security. The Commission recognized that these requirements were only first steps and that further revisions should be considered to ensure effective implementation of the prohibitions. This second report in order would enable the Commission to take important next steps to further strengthen the protection of our nation's communications networks and supply chain. Through the second R&O, we would prohibit the authorization of any device that includes a modular transmitter when that modular transmitter is itself covered equipment. This modification would advance both the Commission's national security objectives and Congress's goal in enacting the Secure Equipment Act. Second, the Commission would adopt a procedure whereby we could limit previously granted authorizations of covered equipment to prohibit the continued importation or marketing without prohibiting continued use of such devices. The adoption of this process would allow the Commission to stop the continual flow of already authorized covered equipment devices into our nation and our communications supply chain, while allowing the Commission to take a targeted approach where needed. Next, we would clarify that we take a broad view regarding whether a device is covered equipment. We would also clarify that our prohibition on authorization of covered equipment extends to modifications of previously authorized equipment and equipment that would become covered as a result of such modification or permissive change. Through the second further notice of proposed rulemaking, we would continue in furthering the Commission's goal of protecting our communications networks and supply chains from equipment that poses an unacceptable risk to national security. We would first seek additional comment on whether the Commission should prohibit authorization of equipment that includes other types of component parts beyond modular transmitters. We would then begin to address the U.S. Court of Appeals partial remand of the Commission's earlier decision in this proceeding by proposing a definition for critical infrastructure for purposes of implementing our prohibition on authorizing covered equipment produced by Hikvision, Dawa, and Hytera, and their subsidiaries and affiliates. We would also seek comment on whether to require full equipment certification for any device modification made by an entity identified on the covered list. Finally, we would seek comment on clarifying the scope of activities that constitute marketing of equipment and on measures to strengthen enforcement of equipment marketing prohibitions. Staff recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Modular transmitters play a key role in the FCC's Equipment Authorization Program, which aims to protect America's communications networks and equipment from malicious interference. To ensure trustworthy devices reach the market and safely serve their customers, we need a secure program with trustworthy participants. So today we adopt rules to continue preventing bad actors from utilizing these key technologies as a backdoor to jeopardize our national security. So I want to thank the Office of Engineering and Technology for your good work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. Protecting the integrity of our nation's communications networks is a clear matter of national security. The actions we take today strengthen our commitment to the integrity of our networks by ensuring that equipment and components posing unacceptable risks to the United States are not authorized, marketed, or deployed in our communications systems. With the second report in order, we close potential loopholes in our equipment authorization process. We make clear that our rules apply not just to complete devices, but also to modular transmitters and components that can serve as the building blocks of our networks. We also establish a clear process to prevent the continued importation and marketing of equipment that has already been authorized but is later identified as a security threat. These steps are essential to maintaining the trustworthiness of our supply chain and the reliability of our networks. Our rules must evolve as technology evolves. As communications equipment becomes increasingly modular and globally sourced, national security risks can arise at any point in the supply chain. By clarifying key definitions such as produced by and prohibiting modifications that could reintroduce covered equipment into the marketplace, we are staying ahead of those risks and reinforcing the integrity of our authorization framework. I also welcome the second further notice of proposed rulemaking, which seeks input on additional safeguards, including the treatment of component parts, a clear definition of critical infrastructure, and stronger enforcement tools. These are forward-looking measures that will help ensure our rules remain both rigorous and adaptable. Protecting our communications networks is a collective responsibility, one that spans agencies, industries, and borders. I am grateful to the staff of the Office of Engineering and Technology for their technical rigor and to our interagency partners for their collaboration and vigilance. With this item, the Commission once again affirms that when it comes to national security, we cannot afford complacency. The integrity of our networks and the trust of the American people depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The FCC has a long history of working together on a bipartisan basis to protect our networks from insecure gear. In fact, it was over 7 years ago now that I first joined with my commission colleagues and proposed that the agency consider ordering the removal of untrustworthy equipment in prohibiting this spy gear from ever entering our networks in the first place. Since then, multiple administrations, Congresses, and FCCs have come together and taken action. The FCC prohibited Huawei, ZTE, and similar bad actors from obtaining federal subsidies. The FCC revoked the authority of entities that would do the CCP's bidding, like China Unicom and China Telecom, from connecting to our networks. The FCC has overseen the removal of insecure gear. We've banned coverless entities from selling new models of their relevant gear. And we recently prohibited bad labs, those located in China, from participating in our equipment authorization program. These have all been good and important steps towards securing our communications networks, but America's foreign adversaries are constantly looking for ways to exploit any vulnerabilities in our system. For instance, we've known for years that devices produced by Huawei, Hikvision, and other coverless entities threaten America's national security. But up to now, the FCC's rules have not prevented coverless providers from continuing to sell previously authorized device models, nor have those rules applied to a device's component parts. These present loopholes that bad actors could use to threaten the security of our networks. So we take action on both fronts today. First, we adopt rules that will allow the FCC to prohibit the importation, marketing, or sale of previously authorized devices on a case-by-case basis. With this new rule, the FCC will have a targeted process it can use to address threats posed by the ongoing sale of devices manufactured by coverless entities. Second, we adopt rules that will close the component parts loophole. Specifically, these new rules will allow the FCC to prohibit not only finished or completed devices produced by a covered list entity, but also otherwise compliant devices that include certain component parts produced by those bad actors. Finally, the Commission also seeks comment today on a range of ideas that would further enable the agency to crack down on devices that threaten our national security. For all their great work on the item, I want to thank the team, Deborah Broderson, Rebecca Clinton, Jamie Coleman, Doug Klein, Shannon Lipp, Neil McNeil, Siobhan Philemon, Kevin Pittman, Chris Smink, and George Tannehill, as well as the chief, for their great work. And we will now proceed to a vote, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trusty.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 on your agenda is titled Fifth Next Gen TV Further Notice and will be presented by the Media Bureau. Aaron Boone, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thanks. Chief Boone, when you are ready and settled, please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Media Bureau presents a fifth further notice of proposed rulemaking seeking comment on rule changes that would support the nation's ongoing television transition to ATSC 3.0. With me at the table today is Policy Division Attorney Advisor Evan Baranoff, who will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present this fifth further notice, tentatively concluding that the Commission should eliminate the simulcasting requirement for stations that transition to 3.0, while continuing to permit simulcasting on a voluntary, simplified basis. The further notice also seeks comment on a range of closely related issues and other matters touching on next-gen TV transition. ATSC 3.0, or next-gen TV, will allow broadcasters to provide enhanced services such as targeted emergency alerts, interactive and special programming features, higher quality video and audio formats, and other innovative offerings. In 2017, the Commission authorized TV broadcasters to use the ATSC 3.0 transmission standard on a voluntary market-driven basis. At that time, the Commission required that next-gen TV broadcasters continue to air at least their primary stream using the current generation TV transmission standard, known as ATSC 1.0. The Commission intended that this local simulcasting requirement would be temporary, and the further notice tentatively concludes that it is now appropriate to eliminate this requirement, both for stations that have already transitioned to 3.0 and those that are now ready to proceed with the transition and flash cut directly to 3.0. The further notice also tentatively concludes that next-gen TV broadcasters should continue to be permitted to simulcast. In order to provide additional flexibility to broadcasters to transition, while also being able to serve their current 1.0 viewers to the greatest extent possible, the item proposes changes to the local simulcasting rules. These include immediately eliminating the substantially similar rule, eliminating the 95% coverage threshold for expedited processing, and permitting the use of MPEG-4 encoding for certain 1.0 simulcast signals so that broadcasters can more efficiently use their spectral capacity. Next, the further notice seeks comment on an ATSC 3.0 tuner requirement, encryption of broadcast signals, and MVPD carriage of 3.0 signals. Finally, it seeks comment on a number of other outstanding ATSC 3.0 and transition issues, including, but not limited to, the sunset of 1.0 service, the status of certain 3.0 technical standards, options to offset consumer costs, accessibility, emergency alerting, and privacy. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this further notice and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We will now proceed to comments from the bench. Commissioner Gomez.
Technical standards matter. Sometimes we think about them when we make sure that we have the right kind of charging cord for our phones, and we often don't. such as also how we all expect our laptop chargers will work in the electrical outlets whenever we travel within the United States. The fact that we need converters to charge most of our personal electronics in other countries is the result of differing technical standards. Every television you purchase in the United States has the ability to be turned on and receive signals from locally broadcasting television stations through its built-in antenna. While many of us subscribe to cable, satellite, or streaming services that deliver the same content via competing technology, there is still a significant segment of the public that receives their television content over the air for free. The ability of televisions to receive and translate broadcast signals for public consumption is fundamental to the public benefits that television broadcasting is intended to provide. This service depends on broadcasting standards. Television broadcasting has been through multiple standards transitions, from black and white to color, from analog to digital. The ability of the viewing public to continue to receive free over-the-air broadcasting signal on the equipment they've already owned has been paramount each time. The media ecosystem is changing rapidly. Much of that is technological, in that we get news and information through streaming platforms as well as through applications on our phones. But other significant changes are impacting the underlying economic model. The advertising economy that supports free over-the-air television is subject to an ever-broadening array of competitors. Within the media ecosystem, however, television broadcasting serves as a key element of the United States civic infrastructure that keeps our democracy strong, because the heartbeat of what they do is local journalism. Throughout my time as a commissioner, I've traveled around the country meeting with stakeholders in the industries we oversee. And almost everywhere I went, I have visited with a local television broadcaster, and I have been able to do so because there are local broadcasters almost everywhere serving their local communities. I am consistently amazed by local journalists' commitment to serving their communities and their passion for their work. The ATSC 3.0, or Next Gen TV standard, is about taking digital television to the next level. Television is moving to an IP-based format that supports features and functionalities that will allow broadcasters to compete more effectively with digital platforms, both on content and economics. I strongly support this evolution and the continued competitive viability of local broadcasters. That said, there are some very complicated questions that this current transition raises. First and foremost is the issue of timing. Next Gen TV is not backwards compatible. What that means is that many televisions being sold in the United States today do not have Next Gen TV antennas and are unable to receive a Next Gen TV signal in the event a station stops broadcasting in ATSC 1.0. Unlike the digital transition in 2009, this transition was not dictated by Congress, and there is currently no funding to support a nationwide education campaign and the provision of Next Gen TV tuners to ensure all consumers that want it have the technology to receive broadcast television on their existing equipment. Consumers have purchased over 14 million ATSC 3.0 capable sets and 300,000 external 3.0 converters that will allow them to receive Next Gen TV signals. Now, while those are big numbers, these televisions are in a small fraction of the households in the United States. This item proposes to give the individual broadcasters the right to decide when they want to do a flash cut to Next Gen TV. While we are dealing with a chicken or an egg problem, I'm concerned that consumers that will either be unaware of the transition before it happens or unable to afford the necessary equipment to continue to receive the services, including emergency notifications, on which they rely. I am interested in seeing whether there are alternative ways to facilitate the transition to Next Gen TV that would minimize the potential negative impact on consumers. And there are additional thorny questions that the Commission is going to have to address. Consumers are clearly concerned about the use of encryption technologies, also referred to as digital rights management. This impacts both whether audiences will be able to continue to enjoy free over-the-air television as they do today, and the impact of privately established standards on the equipment market. Technology should not be a bottleneck to innovation. And there are significant costs of the transition as well. Costs will be borne by manufacturers that will need to add technology to televisions to receive this broadcast, cable and satellite providers that will need to change their equipment to receive the next-gen TV signals, and consumers that will need to purchase antennas for their existing TVs to receive the new signal over the air or potentially pay higher prices for new televisions. I thank the chairman for agreeing to add questions about alternatives that could further protect consumers, and I thank the Media Bureau staff for their continued excellent work on these critical issues.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. Today's commission meeting highlights the many ways in which the communications marketplace continues to drive innovation, from the growing space economy to the ongoing IP transition to the advancement of next-gen television. The FCC is working to foster an environment where this technological progress can continue to thrive. In 2017, the Commission took an important step by paving the way for the next-gen television transition. Responding to a proposal from a diverse coalition of industry stakeholders, the Commission launched a voluntary, market-driven evolution designed to deliver significant public benefits. Today's item explores how the Commission can build on that success and help accelerate the transition. Over time, rules crafted at the early stages of a technology's development can inadvertently create barriers to innovation and investment. This item takes a thoughtful look at our current framework to identify where greater regulatory flexibility could empower broadcasters to advance next-gen television more effectively. The Commission also plays a key role in promoting innovation through collaboration, working hand-in-hand with stakeholders to navigate the complexities that accompany major technology transitions. While next-gen television has already demonstrated its potential, it has also surfaced new technological, marketplace, and regulatory challenges. This item does not avoid those challenges, it addresses them directly. As we move forward, we must stay focused on advancing the public interest in both the specific details and the broader regulatory picture. I have no doubt that next-gen television holds tremendous promise for American consumers, from enhanced audio and video quality to improved public safety, accessibility, and interactive capabilities. I am hopeful this proceeding will encourage all stakeholders to work together toward realizing that potential. Finally, I thank the Media Bureau for its excellent work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. America's television broadcasters are in the midst of an ongoing transition. They're shifting to a new broadcasting standard known as ATSC 3.0 that can deliver significant benefits to consumers across the country. Local broadcasters have unique insights into what works best in their communities, and the proposed rules we adopt today will put more power and flexibility into the hands of those broadcasters, giving them greater freedom to meet those local community needs. First and foremost, this item takes the next step to allow broadcasters who would like to transition to have the opportunity to serve their communities in new and innovative ways. After all, in addition to providing high-quality video programming, ATSC 3.0 will allow broadcasters to deliver more accurate emergency alerts, as well as interactive programming features and other offerings, including data casting services. For television, 3.0 represents the future of broadcasting. Today's action takes steps to support and accelerate the nation's ongoing market-based transition to next-gen TV, to remove unnecessary regulatory obstacles, and to give broadcasters flexibility to determine how best to serve their local communities. For all their great work on the item, I'd like to thank the whole Media Bureau team, and including Evan Barnoff, Hillary DeNigro, Lyle Elder, Evan Morris, Mark Colombo, Susan Aaron, David Conzol, and Chief Boone as well. Thanks to all for your great work on the item. We'll now proceed to a vote. Commissioner Gomez?
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 5 on your agenda is titled Advancing IP Interconnection, Accelerating Network Modernization, and Call Authentication Trust Anchor, and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. And Joseph Calachione, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Calachione, when you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would initiate the next step in the Commission's efforts to accelerate the transition of communications networks to all IP technology by examining our incumbent LEC-specific interconnection requirements. I'd like to thank the entire Wireline team for their hard work on this item, as well as our colleagues in the Public Safety and Homeland Security, Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus, and the Offices of General Counsel, Economics and Analytics, and Communications Business Opportunities. With me at the table today is Jody Griffin, Deputy Bureau Chief, who will now present the item.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, would seek comment on the current state of TDM and IP interconnection for voice services and propose to forbear from incumbent LEC-specific obligations in sections 251C2 and C6 of the Communications Act, and to eliminate the Commission's rules implementing those provisions by a sunset date of December 31st, 2028. Additionally, the notice would seek comment on whether eliminating this framework may affect other statutory frameworks or Commission rules, and whether the Commission should revisit any other provisions or rules that are rendered redundant by the elimination of these obligations. Further, the notice would seek comment on whether any regulatory framework for IP interconnection should replace the current interconnection framework, and on the scope of the Commission's authority to regulate IP interconnection under any such framework. Lastly, the notice would seek comment on ways the Commission can facilitate a successful transition to all IP interconnection for voice services while retaining critical oversight in areas of public safety and consumer protection and ensuring competition. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We will now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The phrase network effects refers to how products or services become more valuable to users as more people use them. Increased usage leads to greater usefulness, which attracts more users, and so on and so on. The telephone network for voice traffic is the foundational modern example of this truism. In a world with multiple voice network providers spanning ever-evolving technologies, interconnection remains imperative to their continued viability. And to provide this service, and thus the potential loss of interconnection, is an existential threat. And despite all the different ways we communicate today, voice calls still matter. I consider myself incredibly lucky to have been in the room where the 1996 Act implementation happened. It was a pivotal time in the development of technology competition policy, and what I learned in the trenches shapes my approach to these critical issues today. This NPRM is examining the continued usefulness of key elements of a congressionally established framework to facilitate the evolution of competitive networks, including voice networks, for the benefit of consumers. All stakeholders appear to agree with the goal of moving toward IP interconnection. There is, however, clear debate about the reasons that these key interconnection points continue to exchange traffic using time division multiplexing or TDM technologies. We hear from the large incumbent LECs that removal of these rules will allow them to negotiate all IP interconnection agreements and move their network forward. We hear from smaller, more rural, competitive network carriers that they too want to exchange traffic in IP format, but the large incumbent LECs are unwilling to negotiate such agreements with them. There is discussion about the competitiveness of the retail voice services market, but much less information in the record about the competitiveness of the wholesale carrier-to-carrier market that the interconnection facilities are a part of. It is definitely timely to examine these issues, and I want to thank the chairman for working with me to add questions to ensure we account for allegations of bottleneck wholesale facilities and consider the impact that they could have on the consumer-facing retail market. I also want to thank the Wireline Competition Bureau staff for bringing both their formidable legal skills and their deep institutional knowledge to this complex proceeding. I look forward to engaging on these issues going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now hear from Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. Advancing the transition to IP-based networks is foundational to restoring U.S. leadership in next-generation communications technologies. We've already seen a significant shift toward IP in last-mile networks. To complete this transition, we must also focus on how providers interconnect their networks, an area that remains anchored in part to outdated technologies. Although interconnection has evolved alongside the broader IP transition, some providers continue to rely on legacy systems. Determining the right regulatory framework to finish this transition has proven challenging. The Commission first examined IP interconnection in depth in a 2011 proceeding that more than a decade later remains unresolved. Now is the time for the FCC to act. This item complements our broader efforts to identify and remove regulatory barriers that impede network modernization. It seeks comment to obtain a full understanding of current marketplace realities and identify potential barriers to IP interconnection. Where outdated rules rooted in past market conditions unnecessarily tie providers to legacy technologies, eliminating those constraints subject to a well-considered transition will help accelerate the full migration to IP-based interconnection. As the item acknowledges, the move to advanced communications networks can deliver significant benefits for consumers, improve reliability and resiliency, greater competition, new and innovative services, and stronger public safety capabilities. These outcomes represent the true goals of the IP transition and will remain my focus as we build the record in this proceeding. I also appreciate the item's recognition that interconnection policy extends beyond technology. Providers need clarity not only on technical standards, but also on the regulatory and market environment in which they operate. Such certainty is essential for continued network investment. I look forward to reviewing the Commission's future considerations on cost recovery and related policy issues. I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for its excellent work on this important item.
Thank you, Commissioners. This is one of those sort of sleeper items that I think in the long run is going to be viewed as paying significant benefits. And frankly, it's part of an overall trend that we've been pushing with our wireline policy. All the way back since February, we've been taking a series of steps to move America's communication networks out of the copper era and into the modern broadband age across every segment of the infrastructure. These efforts are about accelerating the build-out of high-speed, reliable networks so that providers can focus on upgrading and expanding service rather than maintaining decades-old and increasingly expensive copper line networks. Today, we're taking the next step by seeking comment on whether to remove outdated interconnection rules that were written for the days of landlines and dial tones. At the same time, we're looking at ways to ensure a smooth transition to all IP modern networks while maintaining oversight on public safety, consumer protection, and competition issues. For all their great work on the item, I'd like to express my thanks as well to the team, to Eric Beath, Jesse Goodwin, Jody Griffin, Melissa Kirkle, Jody May, and the Chief as well. Thanks for all your great work on the item. With that, we will proceed to a vote, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. We are churning through items today, which is a good thing. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 6 on your agenda is titled Empowering Broadband Consumers Through Transparency and will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Edward Bottlemay, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Chief, when you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Today, I'm pleased to introduce on behalf of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau an item that, if adopted, would propose to streamline the Commission's broadband label rules to reduce unnecessary
compliance burdens and better align the rules with the mandate from Congress, while ensuring that consumers retain access to the information they need to make informed choices about broadband services. Before turning the presentation over to my CGB colleague, I'd like to thank the Enforcement, Wireline, Wireless, and Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureaus and the Offices of Communications Business Opportunities, Economics and Analytics, and General Counsel for their valuable assistance. Joining me at the table today is Michelle Brannigan, an attorney advisor in CGB's Consumer Policy Division, and she will present the item.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Congress directed the Commission in 2021 to require broadband providers to display labels to help consumers make informed decisions when choosing a broadband plan. The Commission adopted detailed broadband label rules in 2022. Throughout the proceeding and in response to the recent delete public notice, parties have suggested that the Commission eliminate several label requirements because they are burdensome, not mandated by Congress, and provide minimal consumer benefit. The notice of proposed rulemaking before you would propose to eliminate 6 such requirements. Specifically, the notice would propose to eliminate the requirements that broadband providers read the labels to consumers over the phone, itemize state and local pass-through fees that vary by location, provide information about the now concluded Affordable Connectivity Program, display labels in customer account portals, make labels available in machine-readable format, and archive labels for at least 2 years after a service is no longer offered to new customers. The draft notice also would seek comment on other ways the Commission could streamline the label requirements, whether to eliminate or keep the multilingual requirement, and whether to remove the label template from the CFR and instead provide a link to the template on the Commission website. The Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau recommends adoption of this notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
I typically vote in favor of notices of proposed rulemaking because I believe in asking balanced questions, even on proposals that I dislike, so that we can encourage fruitful and helpful public comment. Answers to tough questions help us strike the right balance so that our rules can both encourage competition and serve consumers. However, the questions posed in this NPRM are so anti-consumer that I could not bring myself to even agree to them. In 2022, the FCC unanimously adopted an order establishing the broadband labels, an easy-to-understand label for consumers to learn what is included in their broadband internet service plan, akin to the nutrition labels we commonly see on food products. Congress instructed us to establish a requirement for broadband service providers to display these easy-to-understand labels. This was a unanimous yes vote. There were no dissents or even concurrences on the record. And now, during the government shutdown, we proposed a reverse course. This is one of the most anti-consumer proposals I have yet to see. The broadband labels are about empowering consumers. The goal of the label is to inform you, consumer at home, so that you know clearly what is included on your bill. But with this proposal, the agency says you don't need that clarity. In plain language, here's what the agency proposes to do today. If a customer calls a broadband service provider to ask about what is included in the cost of internet service in their area, the company would no longer be required to provide the details because the FCC apparently think that sales do not occur over telephone calls. The FCC would allow companies to no longer explain line by line the fees that they choose to pass on to their consumers. These are fees that they are not required to pass on to customers, but they choose to add them to the customer's bills so they can collect them without disclosing them in their marketed price. The FCC proposes to allow companies to elect not to disclose these fees in detail. Currently, the broadband label, this tool of transparency, is only available to consumers in 2 places: at the point of sale and via your online account portal. Today, the FCC proposes to eliminate the requirement that companies display it on customers' online portals. Remember, information is power. A bipartisan Congress decided that consumers need basic information to make informed choices. If these proposals are adopted, all the information that Congress wanted to ensure consumers have to make informed decisions about the cost of their service would no longer be available to them via their online consumer portal. If these proposals are adopted, the label would only be available to customers at the point of sale, which you will recall nonsensically would no longer include purchases made over the phone. And finally, if a customer purchased broadband internet service from a provider that marketed that service in a language other than English, the FCC today proposes to no longer require that company to give their customers the label in that language. So even though the company sought out and convinced customers to choose their service in Spanish, French, Vietnamese, etc., they do not have to provide this important consumer information about the service their customers are paying for in that language. And what adds insult to injury is that the FCC does not even explain why this proposal is necessary. Make it make sense. Instead of scaling back the information that customers receive, we should be making sure that in fact they can benefit from the labels. Are they easy to find? Are they buried deep inside a company's website? As I said, this is one of the most anti-consumer items I have seen. What we do is for the public, to help you, the consumer. This item would make it possible for companies to remove important information that actually helps consumers. It would make it possible for companies to hide the details of what you pay. When I accepted the responsibility of being a commissioner, I was crystal clear on one principle that would inform every single one of my decisions: empower consumers with information. I am resolute in the belief that the FCC does our best work when we honor the consumers we serve. And this makes market sense. Consumer information is a cornerstone of the free market. Consumer access to clear, easy to understand, and accurate information is central to a well-functioning marketplace that encourages competition, innovation, low prices, and high-quality service. That's the opening line of the unanimous 2022 FCC order adopting the labels. The more information is available to consumers, the less there is a need for regulation. But today, we propose to shut down information that consumers already have access to. In this economy, with the price of groceries still on the rise, the least we can do is continue to ensure that families have information that help them make clear decisions about their pocketbook. Today, we propose to do the opposite. I am pleased to see that the Chair's office incorporated questions that ask about the negative effect these proposals would have on consumers. Unfortunately, the fundamental proposal remains. During a government shutdown, the FCC proposes to remove rules that require the transparency that so benefits consumers. I cannot support this disregard for the well-being of consumers. Nonetheless, I do want to acknowledge the work of the Bureau.
Thank you. Commissioner Trustee?
Ensuring that consumers can make informed purchasing decisions is an area of common ground in broadband policy debates, and it's also the law. In 2021, Congress directed the Commission to adopt nutrition-style labels for broadband services. As a result, broadband labels have played a vital role in empowering consumers to make informed decisions about the services they purchase. At the same time, agencies have an ongoing responsibility to assess whether their rules are working as intended. The Commission's delete, delete, delete proceeding is a key example of that responsibility in action. I appreciate the thoughtful input from stakeholders in this proceeding who have identified where our broadband label requirements may be overly burdensome or unnecessary. These are important issues to examine to ensure that our rules do not impose unwarranted costs that could hinder broadband deployment or innovation. I also value the perspectives of stakeholders who emphasize the continued benefits of certain requirements. This process gives the Commission an opportunity to weigh those competing viewpoints carefully, and I look forward to reviewing the full record. As this proceeding moves forward, I will be particularly attentive to whether any of our current requirements inadvertently undermine the goal of informing consumers. It is always valuable when the FCC can eliminate rules whose burdens outweigh their benefits, but it's essential that we act where rules frustrate their own purpose. If label requirements confuse or mislead consumers or otherwise diminish the usefulness of broadband labels, The Commission should take steps to fix them. I thank the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for its thoughtful work on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Consumers want clear, concise, and accurate information about the products and services they buy. And that's certainly the case when it comes to purchasing their broadband plans. That's why in 2021, Congress passed a law that tasks the FCC with requiring that ISPs display simple and easy to understand consumer broadband labels. When the prior FCC kicked off its effort to implement the law, I emphasized the importance of adopting labels that would promote clarity, not confusion. I also stressed the need for the FCC to adhere closely to the statutory framework Congress established in that 2021 law. Unfortunately, however, the FCC departed quite dramatically from that approach when it adopted its final rules. Rather than focusing on the information that consumers want and need, the agency added costly requirements that are unrelated to a consumer's purchasing decision. The consequences are now clear for everyone to see. In fact, since the labels became available, some have said that finding the needed information can be a, quote, Sisyphean task, or even feel like a game of Where's Waldo? When consumers view the labels, they aren't finding the information they need to make an informed decision, or not finding it in an efficient and timely manner. So today we take action to separate the wheat from the chaff. We're seeking comment on how we can refocus these labels on transparently providing the information that consumers actually need as contemplated by the 2021 statute. We ask how we can make it easier for consumers to find the labels in the first place. We're moving these regulations towards the nutrition label model that inspired this effort in the first place. By doing so, consumers can more quickly and easily compare broadband plans and choose which one is best for them. This will help ensure an efficient and well-functioning marketplace for broadband services, and I'm very pleased that we're moving forward today. So thanks so much to the team for all the great work on the item. I'd like to thank in particular Michelle Brannigan, Zach Champ, Aaron Garza, Wes Platt, Micah Severe, and Mark Stone, as well as the chief. Thanks for your work on the item. We will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Gomez?
I dissent.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 7 on your agenda will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And once again, Ed Bartholomew, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction. The item is titled Improving Verification and Presentation of Caller Identification Information.
Chief, when you're ready, please proceed.
Today, I'm also pleased to introduce, on behalf of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, an item that, if adopted, would propose to give consumers accurate caller name and other information that enables them to regain control of their phones by ensuring they no longer have to guess whether a call is one they want to pick up. Before turning the presentation over to my CGB colleague, I'd like to thank the Enforcement, Wireline, Wireless, and Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureaus, and the Offices of Communications Business Opportunities, Economics and Analytics, General Counsel, and International Affairs for their valuable assistance on this item. Joining me again at the table is Michelle Brannigan, an attorney advisor in our Consumer Policy Division, to present the item.
Good morning again, Chairman and Commissioners. The notice of proposed rulemaking before you proposes steps to improve the availability and accuracy of caller identification information transmitted to consumers to enable consumers to better understand who is calling and decide whether to answer calls. Consumer surveys indicate that accurate caller name can increase consumer willingness to answer a call by over 70%. First, the notice would propose to require terminating voice service providers to transmit verified caller name for presentation on consumers' handsets whenever they transmit call authentication information indicating that the originating number has received A-level attestation under the Stir-Shaken framework, indicating the phone number is unlikely to be spoofed. It also would propose to require originating voice service providers to verify that the caller name and other information about the caller that they transmit is accurate and secure so that consumers can trust it. Second, because many unlawful robocalls originate from outside the United States, the notice would propose to ensure that providers inform consumers when calls originate from a foreign country and require blocking analytics to consider that a call originated from a foreign country. It also would seek comment on prohibiting spoofing of United States telephone numbers for foreign-originated calls. Third, the notice would propose to modernize existing robocall rules by simplifying, streamlining, or eliminating some possibly outdated requirements that technology and calling practices have overtaken. Finally, it would provide notice of intent to dismiss older petitions for reconsideration and applications for review that were filed between 2012 and 2021 related to the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. The Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau recommends adoption of this notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Robocalls are the #1 complaint that consumers raise to the FCC. Not only are robocalls an annoying nuisance, but they also open a door to fraud. At the FCC, we are continuously working to solve this problem. Unfortunately, there is no one solution because there are many sources of unauthorized robocalls. The tools used to perpetrate them are varied, and the techniques scammers employ keep evolving. So we continuously propose and implement new rules to fight this scourge and ultimately to protect consumers. Today, we seek comment on new tools, such as rich call data, as well as proposed modifications to existing rules. I'd like to thank the Office of the Chairman for working with me to improve the assumptions with which we started this draft, retain rules that continue to protect consumers, and incorporate questions that consider all angles when we propose to modify a rule so that we do not lose the original goal of the rules, which is to protect consumers from robocalls. Thank you also to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for helping us add further information about the proposals we put forth today.
Thank you. Commissioner Trusty.
Thanks. Combating illegal robocalls and restoring consumer trust in telephone networks remains an essential part of the FCC's mission. One of our most effective tools is improved information. Empowering consumers with accurate, timely information helps them use telephone networks with greater confidence. Likewise, ensuring that providers obtain and use key information about the traffic on their networks helps prevent illegal calls from ever reaching consumers, whether through careful vetting of customers or through measures such as call blocking. Another critical tool is our implementation of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act's call restrictions. Faithfully applying that statute in light of marketplace and technological evolution requires ongoing evaluation to ensure we properly identify which categories of calls are illegal while preserving consumers' ability to receive the communications they want and need. This item takes action on both fronts. It seeks comment on ways to provide consumers with better information about who is on the other end of the call. In addressing the technical challenges involved, I am pleased that the item builds on existing industry standards and marketplace efforts where possible. The item also proposes steps to combat robocalls originating outside of the United States, a particularly challenging category for the Commission's enforcement efforts. I am hopeful that by giving providers better access to information about these calls, they will be better equipped to respond, including through the use of reasonable analytics to voluntarily block suspicious traffic. Finally, the item seeks comment on ensuring that our implementation of the TCPA remains current and aligned with consumer interests. For example, while the FCC recently adopted rules to make it easier for consumers to revoke consent to receive robocalls, some stakeholders, including those in the financial sector, public utilities, and consumer advocates, have raised concerns about unintended consequences, such as lost fraud alerts or emergency notifications. I'm glad that we are taking a closer look at these and other issues as we continue refining our approach. I thank the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for its thoughtful work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Congress, the FCC, other federal agencies, state authorities have all been engaged in a multi-decade effort to combat the scourge of illegal robocalls. And for years, the government's effort have been described as a game of whack-a-mole. When we address one type of scam, another one pops up using a new technological workaround. We're now trying to take a different approach. We're looking at every point in the life cycle of an illegal robocall and working to make it harder for the bad actors to run their schemes. We're focusing on prevention, stopping bad actors from ever originating robocalls in the first place. We're pushing carriers to block more illegal robocalls before they reach consumers. We're giving Americans better tools to recognize and distinguish legitimate calls from the scam ones. And we're stepping up enforcement to make sure that every provider doing business in the U.S. takes proactive steps to mitigate robocalls, or they will lose access to a database that's necessary for them to continue to deliver traffic. Today's item advances this comprehensive approach in two ways. First, it empowers Americans by giving them more control and more choice over the phone calls they pick up. Specifically, we're proposing to require that providers display a verified caller name and other useful data like a brand logo or the reason for the call. Our call authentication efforts to date have helped confirm whether a call is legitimate, but a consumer doesn't always know who's calling or why. With more information, people can stop guessing and start making better informed decisions. Second, we're targeting foreign-originated scam calls. After all, a significant portion of fraudulent and unwanted calls originate from overseas. So we want to make it harder for them to get through. This includes by deterring the use of U.S. area codes for foreign-originated calls and by requiring increased blocking of calls that originate overseas. If this type of transparency encourages corporations to onshore more of their call center operations, then that will be an added benefit too. Cracking down on this scourge of illegal robocalls is an important step in ending this scourge once and for all. So I'd like to thank the team again for their great work on this item. I'd like to thank in particular John Adams, Michelle Brannigan, Aaron Garza, Chris Laughlin, Jonathan Lecter, Wes Platt, Richard Smith, Mark Stone, and the Chief. Thank you all for your work. We will now proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
Commissioner Trustee?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 8 on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Joseph Calichon, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction. The item is titled Incarcerated People's Calling Services.
Thank you. Chief, when you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Yeah, check to see if it was morning
Yeah,
still.
It's still morning, we're still here.
We're making it.
The Wireline Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a report and order on reconsideration, and further notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would revisit the framework established by the 2024 IPCS order. This will ensure that the FCC is achieving its statutory mandate while also addressing the negative unintended consequences that have flowed from the previous approach. Those include risks to safety and security, as well as reductions in the availability of IPCS. I'd like to thank the entire Bureau team for their work on this item, as well as our colleagues in the Offices of Economics and Analytics, General Counsel, and Communications Business Opportunities. With me at the table is David Zessiger, Chief of the Bureau's Pricing Policy Division, who will present the item.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. In 2024, the Commission adopted a report and order on reconsideration, clarification and waiver, and further notice of proposed rulemaking, implementing the provisions of the Martha Wright Reed Act. which directed the Commission to ensure that all IPCS rates are just and reasonable and fairly compensatory. After the 2024 IPCS order became effective, a record developed suggesting that the adopted rate caps were set too low to ensure sufficient funding for necessary safety and security tools such as call monitoring and recording, and to account for correctional facility costs. This report and order, order on reconsideration, and further notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, would take several steps to revise the rate caps and invite comment on additional changes to the IPCS rules. If adopted, the report and order on reconsideration would modify the Commission's rate caps by first using only billed minutes to determine providers' costs. Second, incorporating all the safety and security measure expenses into the lower bounds of the zones of reasonableness. And third, creating an additional rate cap tier for extremely small jails. The item would also adopt a separate interim rate additive of 2 cents per minute, similar to the rate additive adopted by the Commission in 2021 to account for correctional facilities expenses. The further notice of proposed rulemaking would seek comment on the adoption of permanent rate caps for audio and video IPCS, the adoption of a permanent rate additive for facility cost recovery, and the continued prohibition of ancillary service charges. The Bureau recommends adoption of the order and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you for the presentation. We will now hear comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
The order the Commission is adopting today is indefensible. It implements an egregious transfer of wealth from families in incredibly vulnerable situations to greedy monopoly companies that seek to squeeze every penny out of them. And this transfer is sanctioned by the government. Today, the Commission adopts an order that gives monopoly companies facing zero competition the authority to increase the costs for families to maintain critical connections with their loved ones in prison. These families have no option but to pay the higher rates, regardless of whether they have enough to make rent, buy groceries, or pay the electric bill, or whether they are able to work enough hours or need to get a third job. If they want to stay in touch with a loved one in a correctional facility, their cousin, friend, brother, mother, they have no other option but to figure out how to pay the higher rates the Commission imposes on them today. In 2024, just last year, at the direction of bipartisan legislation that was long in the making, we adopted just and reasonable rates that provided fair compensation to providers pursuant to the Martha Wright Reed Act. This was a decision adopted unanimously. By one measure today, 76% of prison systems across the country already comply with the 2024 rate caps, and only 3 states, Florida, Kentucky, and Oklahoma, have rates above the new rate caps proposed in this order. This means that most of the prisons in the country can and do provide IPCS services with the rate caps we previously implemented. Despite this, we are hearing from providers that the 2024 rate caps have resulted in reduced access to both revenue and safety and security measures, which in turn endanger facility and public safety and has left some prisons considering stopping the provision of IPCS services. The providers making these claims did not even bother to meet with my office to explain their position. Thus, I only heard this secondhand. But to be clear, the instant order does not cite to any incidents demonstrating unsafe conditions at correctional facilities as the result of the 2024 IPCS order. Instead, we are relying on providers' claims that isolated facilities warned that they would not be able to pay for safety and security measures for IPCS services, which are typically funded from revenue from IPCS users. It is mind-boggling that the order claims we lack sufficient data to support the proposed higher rates and nonetheless decides to err on the side of giving the monopoly companies that have provided the supposedly insufficient data everything they ask for and more. In other words, the FCC today decides to reward bad behavior. And throughout the order, it rewards bad behavior out of concern for the companies that repeatedly elected not to provide the requested data. For example, the agency now reverses course and agrees to include security and law enforcement expenses that were previously excluded based on a careful analysis of the data provided by IPCS providers that found these costs were not used and useful to the provision of IPCS services. In 2024, we allowed costs for CALIA compliance and communication security services to be incorporated in the rate caps. Today, we expand the types of costs that providers can recover from the families of incarcerated persons and include 3 additional categories: law enforcement support services, communications recording services, and communications monitoring services. Based on information provided by IPCS providers themselves, the law enforcement category includes expenses for search warrant processing and FOIA request processing. The communications recording services category includes expenses for storing recorded communications, transcribing such recordings, and converting recordings into digital formats to support investigation and litigation activities. And the communications monitoring service categories is now predominantly used to aid investigations related to detention facilities, aid corrections and law enforcement agencies in investigation and litigation activities, and provide for skilled investigators. None of these functions serves to facilitate the actual provision of IPCS. In 2024, we concluded that these categories in general serve law enforcement needs rather than being used and useful in the provision of IPCS, and thus should not be included in the rate caps. In other words, the families who are paying for these calls should not have to shoulder these unrelated costs. Today, the Commission states that despite the detailed instructions and description of the categories the Commission provided to encourage data submission, there is a lack of comprehensive data necessary to analyze how these costs should be treated in the rate caps. Despite this admission, the Commission decides to treat all costs as worthy of being recoverable through the fees imposed on the families of incarcerated people. IPCS providers have this data, but fail to submit it, and then claim that we lack the data necessary when they dislike the decision that we make. So now, the Commission gives them what they want without any new data. Again, the Commission rewards bad behavior. To be clear, I'm not saying that these institutions should not have safety and security services. What I am saying is we should not charge families of incarcerated persons for safety and security measures that are unrelated to making IPCS calls themselves. And that's what today's order does. And then the Commission goes beyond simply increasing rates. In this order, it also adds a 2-cent per minute topper on the baseline cost of rates to reward facilities, another class of entities that have failed to provide us with data to justify why they need a cut of the money that families pay. The Commission implements this 2-cent additive based on a survey that is 10 years old and limited to jails, and thus does not include information about the costs prisons incur to allow access to IPCS. That is correct. Despite the fact it is based on old data on costs jails incur, the extra 2 cents per minute will be available to both jails and prisons immediately, effectively raising the rate caps the Commission allows. So with outdated data that does not include information about the costs in prisons or make a distinction between calls and video services, the Commission agrees to allow IPCS providers to charge a higher rate to families that it can in turn pass on to jails and to prisons. I disagree with having an additive at all. That said, there are better ways to implement this additive than what the Commission does today. We could have limited the additive to jails, only based on the scope of the survey data. We could have structured an opt-in process where the additive could be initially available to jails and available to prisons upon request, and a showing justifying why these 2 cents per minute were critical to the facility's provision of IPCS. But once again, the commission is choosing to reward bad behavior at the expense of the families. And then there's even more. In the 11th hour before sunshine, the order points to a single company letter on the record requesting additional rate increases through the application of an inflation factor. This factor was adopted or will be adopted without giving notice to the public that an inflation factor was being considered, without evidence in the record that this factor is actually necessary but for the request of a single company, and with an insufficient explanation as to why the inflation factor should be 6.7% and not offset by a productivity factor that is commonplace in rate setting. This inflation factor will go into effect immediately and result in an additional 1 to 2 cent per minute increase to the majority of the rate caps, depending on the facility size. The FCC once again is going above and beyond to address the unsubstantiated needs of monopoly providers to squeeze every penny possible from families that want to stay in touch with their loved ones. Throughout this order, the FCC chooses to reward corporations with money taken from vulnerable families. The decisions the Commission makes today are not abstract economic calculations without ripple effects across our society. We know that keeping families connected during incarceration saves lives, strengthens reentry for people returning from incarceration, and supports safer communities. Throughout the record, there are personal stories about the impact these actions will have on real families. For Liliana, IPCS isn't just about money, it's about family, healing, and giving people a real chance to rebuild their lives. Liliana grew up with her mother in and out of prison. When she was very young, she could not afford to pay for the calls, and her caretakers did not want to cover the costs. The inability to reach her mom meant she could not reach her even when she needed to ask for medical information in order to take her younger sister to the doctor. For Annalisa, who had seen her father and uncle in prison, she knows that even small costs can be a huge barrier for struggling families. At a young age, after seeing her father arrested and being unable to speak to him for nearly a month, Annalisa fell in a deep depression that required hospitalization. She says that is when she learned just how important it is for children to be able to stay in contact with their parents, and that phone calls can make all the difference. We have to do better by all the families reliant on IPCS, and that does not mean that providers cannot recover their legitimate and documented costs and continue to provide IPCS services to all who need them. But it does mean that our establishment of rate caps cannot be based on hyperbolic threats to discontinue service and expenses that have nothing to do with the costs of actually providing the service. And the Commission should not reward uncooperative providers and facilities that consistently fail to give us data. Technology is relational. At its best, IPCS represents a lifeline for struggling families. At its worst, it represents a relationship severed by greed. We have to stop rewarding bad behavior and do better for those who end up paying the true cost of the rates we implement today. Many of us are fortunate not to have to worry about the cost of a phone or a video call. Incarcerated people and their loved ones, like Liliana and Annalisa, know too well the prohibitive cost of staying connected. For these reasons, I dissent.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will now turn to comments from Commissioner Trustee.
Thank you. The Commission's approach to incarcerated people's communication services, or IPCS, rests on 3 core principles. First, there are tremendous public benefits when incarcerated individuals can communicate with friends and loved ones. Those connections promote rehabilitation, strengthen families, and ultimately reduce the likelihood of reoffense. That benefits not only the individuals and their families, but society as a whole. Second, because each correctional facility typically only has one IPCS provider, we are dealing with a monopoly environment. That reality demands regulatory oversight to protect consumers from anti-competitive practices. And third, any communication system operating in a correctional setting must incorporate robust measures to ensure the safety and security of correctional staff, inmates, and the public. These three principles are deeply interconnected. Unjust or unreasonable IPCS rates can make it more difficult for incarcerated individuals to stay connected to their loved ones, undermining the public benefits of communication. But without proper safety and security measures, correctional facilities cannot responsibly allow IPCS at all. Those measures are essential, and the associated cost must be recognized. For too long, the Commission failed to fully grapple with that second principle, leaving IPCS consumers unprotected in a monopoly market. When the agency later stepped in, it did so with good intentions, but without a clear statutory foundation or sufficient record support. As a result, our rules were in constant flux, adopted, revised, reconsidered, and ultimately overturned by the courts. The D.C. Circuit's 2017 decision left the Commission with narrow authority and limited tools to act, but the story didn't end there. In 2021, the FCC took a more balanced approach, acknowledging both the need for safety and security measures and the need to protect consumers within the limits of our authority at that time. Then, in 2023, Congress gave the Commission clear direction and expanded authority we had long needed. That legislation explicitly empowered the FCC to ensure IPCS rates are just, reasonable, and fair, and it required us to account for the costs of necessary safety and security measures. When the Commission implemented the new law in 2024, it did so with the right intentions. But subsequent developments suggest that the 2024 rate caps did not always strike the right balance under the new statutory framework. For example, the 2024 analysis relied heavily on categories that proved too rigid in practice, which resulted in excluding recovery for many legitimate costs in providing IPCS services. That in turn has contributed to unintended consequences, like the loss of IPCS service in some facilities. Through the further notice, we can take a closer look at how to more accurately capture those costs and avoid disruptions to service going forward. With today's item, I support the corrective steps we're taking to address the unintended effects of the 2024 rules, but it's clear that more work remains. Consumers, providers, and facilities alike need stability, and I'm counting on stakeholders to ensure that the record we build in the further notice will enable us to act with confidence to adopt legally sound, permanent rate caps that achieve that balance. I particularly look forward to more up-to-date and comprehensive evidence regarding correctional facility costs to evaluate whether those costs should be recovered through permanent rates. I also look forward to provider data regarding safety and security costs that enable the Commission to conduct a nuanced analysis to determine which of those costs should be recovered in permanent rates. My sincere thanks to the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of Economics and Analytics for their thorough and thoughtful work on this item and for their continued efforts to advance a framework that promotes safety, consumer benefits, and stability in IPCS.
Thank you, Commissioner. For more than a decade now, the FCC has tried to set rates for inmate calling services that are both fair and legally sustainable, ones that are reasonable for callers and sufficient to ensure that providers and facilities have the resources necessary to make those calling services available. By my count, the FCC has attempted to find the right balance on at least 6 separate occasions. Those decisions have resulted in no less than 4 court cases or challenges. In many cases, the courts have stayed or otherwise invalidated the FCC's approach. This endless cycle of uncertainty is not good for any stakeholder involved in the process. Now, Congress took an important step forward with the passage of the Martha Wright Reed Act in 2022. That law addressed some of the statutory authority concerns that sank prior FCC efforts and directed the FCC to weigh 2 specific statutory goals, namely reasonable rates and fair compensation. In its last effort to strike the right balance, the Commission adopted new rules in 2024 to implement the Act. But as the record has shown, those rules have resulted in serious unintended consequences. For example, by limiting how facilities could recover safety and security costs, some prisons or jails were forced to scale back or even stop offering calling services altogether. That's not good for anyone, especially when it puts staff and public safety at risk. Today's actions seek to correct course by taking the lessons we've learned and applying them to create a new framework, one that we intend to be durable, predictable, and lawful. In doing so, the FCC not only ensures that we adopt just and reasonable rates, ones that are consistent with the Martha Wright Reed Act, but we adopt rates today that are below rates set in 2021 by the Biden administration. We're setting rates lower than the Biden administration originally set. But the rates also ensure that providers keep these vital services running safely and securely. So thank you again to the team for all of your great work on the item. For their work, I'd like to thank in particular Allison Baker, Peter Bean, Terry Kavanaugh, Bradley Craigmile, Lynn Engeldow, Shabir Hamid, Bill Kehoe, Dick Kwiatkowski, Eric Raven Hansen, Simon Soleimani, David Zeziger, as well as the chief himself. Thanks much to the team on the item, and we will proceed to a vote. Commissioner Gomez?
I dissent.
Commissioner Trusty?
Approve.
I will vote to approve as well. And with that, Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 9, the last on your agenda, is titled Deleting Obsolete and Duplicative Wireless Rules and will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Joel Taubenblatt, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Chief, when you're ready and settled, please proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today's item would repeal certain wireless regulations that have been identified as obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary. Amy Brett, Chief of Staff of the Bureau, will present the item.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Today we present the Wireless Telecommunication Bureau's Direct Final Rule, which represents the latest step in the Commission's delete proceeding. We reviewed 19 rule parts administered by the Wireless Bureau and identified approximately 400 rules or rule parts totaling more than 58,000 words and covering approximately 137 pages of the Code of Federal Regulations that plainly no longer serve the public interest. For example, these deletions include market aggregation limits that sunset more than 20 years ago, rules for obsolete radio printer operations in the maritime systems, and requirements for licensees that the FCC has not issued in more than a decade. The process for implementing this direct final rule will be consistent with earlier actions in the proceeding. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt the direct final rule and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits.
Thanks. We'll now proceed to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
While I appreciate the hard work of the agency staff in identifying potentially outdated rules, I must reiterate my process concerns with this item. And this process is not getting better with age. We have imposed a massive burden on the public in asking it to review 396 rules in an unreasonably short time period. 20 days does not give adequate time to review, understand, and respond to almost 400 rules. And my request to extend the window to 45 days to allow for additional participation was denied. When it comes to eliminating longstanding rules, this is imprudent. Notably, 2 errors were reported by well-resourced industry associations, suggesting that other problematic deletions may be overlooked in the Commission's hastiness. Because I worry about the public's ability to properly assess the impact of the broader changes it may be subjected to, I dissent. Nonetheless, I want to acknowledge the work of the Bureau.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trusty.
Thanks. With this item, the Commission advances its ongoing effort to identify and eliminate rules that are obsolete, unused, or otherwise outdated and unnecessary. This month's review includes the proposed removal of market aggregation limits that expired more than 2 decades ago, regulations to obsolete radio printer operations and maritime services, and licensing requirements for authorizations the FCC has not issued in over 10 years. I thank the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for its work on this item, and I look forward to future Commission actions that build on this important agency-wide initiative.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be short this time. The delete train must continue to move on. So thanks to the team for all of your great work. Really pleased to see that we are getting rid of some more dead wood along the way. So thanks for your review and for your work and for fly-specking all of those rule parts. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item, starting with Commissioner Gomez.
I dissent.
Commissioner Trusty.
Approve.
The chair votes yes as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. I'm told I might not have said it, but the prior item also had editorial privileges requested and was voted with that in mind as well. At this point, I don't think I have any announcements, but would my colleagues like to make any announcements at all?
I have a brief announcement.
Great.
So my legal advisor, Will Holloway, recently welcomed a new member to his family, Walker Holloway, on October 12th. Mother and baby are doing well. He is now on paternity leave, but in his absence, we are glad to welcome Nellie Fusiner to our team. We'll get her pronunciation correct when the shutdown ends. But she will lead on wireless space, international engineering and technology, and the public safety portfolio. She comes from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, so thank you for letting us have her for a couple of months. We're excited that she'll be with us. She comes from, or she started at the FCC as an honors attorney, so she's top-notch. We're excited about her arrival. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. As indicated, I have no announcements this month. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next date for our, hopefully, commission monthly agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, November 20th, 2025.
Thanks. Until then, we stand adjourned.
Check 1, 2, 3. You got me?
Check 1, 2. Yep.
All right, everybody, if you are in the back room having a conversation, please take your private conversations outside. We're going to get started with the chairman's press conference here momentarily. All right, got a full court press for today. Thank you all for coming. I'm Katie Gorsak. I'm the Acting Director for the FCC Office of Media Relations. Per usual, if you could please identify your outlet and your name when you ask your question, that'd be greatly appreciated. We're trying to limit it to one. And with that, I will hand it off to the Chairman of the FCC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate that. Extra bonus for you this year for the applause. Well, thanks, everyone. Welcome to the shutdown version of the FCC. I think we're in day 28 or so of the Schumer shutdown. I think there's been about a dozen votes to try to reopen the government, and we are seeing negative consequences, obviously already at the FCC. For one, we've got our own national security officials who are accepted and are here working without pay, including our watch officers that are up in our SCIF and at certain facilities that we have around the country. There's been a lot of our equipment certification work that obviously has had to push pause on. As you know, there's no piece of electronics or communications device that can be sold or used in the U.S. without an approval for the FCC, and so we're starting to see a backlog there. Licensing requests, we're having issues there as well, and obviously the consumer complaint portal itself is also down. So I think it is, past time at this point to reopen the government fully, and we can be, again, fully staffed at the FCC. With that, I'm happy to start with some questions on this end.
Hi, Chairman Carr, Chris Cole with Law 360. I just wanted to follow up on the shutdown issue because I believe you had indicated it was at a U.S. Telecom forum the other day that although you don't have as many people working, of course, you do have a couple of initiatives that you're able to concentrate on. Could you just kind of walk us through what those are and be more specific?
Yeah, I think as our sort of shutdown plan indicates, there's a couple of things that are going on. One, we have accepted employees that are sort of vital for national security and a sort of additional set of issues that are here and working without pay. We have exempted employees, which are a very small number of employees that we have back in the building doing significant work for the agency. And in terms of the ability to pay, there's been an amount of carryover funds that the FCC has had. And also we have a separate appropriation for work on auctions and related spectrum issues. But I think as a total matter, we're down to about 20% at this point. For this meeting, obviously we had 9. We're not gonna have 9, unfortunately, at the November meeting, but the 9 were obviously, largely baked fully before the shutdown hit. And we had sort of a skeleton crew able to take any ex parte meetings that people wanted, be able to respond to and present the items. But we're trying to be really good stewards of the limited dollars that we have, while at the same time urging the full reopening of the government. This week, yeah. Yeah, that's our plan. Our plan is to try to continue to hold meetings as long as we can. Again, they won't be as full as this meeting because we have, fewer staff. We're roughly 20% staffing at this point, and we're going to try to move ahead with the November meeting. But again, it won't be quite as many items as we'd like, maybe ideally. And then obviously December and January meetings, you have teams that aren't able to work on those items. So we'll see if we can mitigate some of the harms that come from that. But again, the first meeting in November was largely done before the shutdown. And so I think you're going to start to see a bit more difficulty going forward. But we're going to try to get, some of the, really most important things, continue to have trains moving on that with as limited staff as we can do. Because again, we don't know how long the shutdown's going to go.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, John Hindle with Politico. Just wanted to ask, how has the FCC approached the topic of RIFs, and has there been any dialogue with OMB about that? Is the FCC workforce generally at a pretty good level right now overall? I know it was just under, I think, 1,300, like at the end of September, according to the shutdown plan.
Sorry, what? What was the number you said?
Just under 1,300, I think. So just wondering, is that kind of feeling like the right size to you now? Has there been any pressure to reduce the size of the FCC at all? How are you thinking about that?
Well, look, a couple issues. We're all obviously sort of always assessing not just sort of a number, but making sure we have the right people in the right places. when I first came into this job, we were having, potentially some issues with a couple of funding streams where we may have even had to go back to Congress to get extra funding to carry out some projects. And we came in and have made a lot of efforts, whether it's DOGE efforts or efficiency efforts generally. We've been able to sort of get the FCC on sound financial footing without having to go back at this point for additional funds. And again, we've had a minimal amount of carryover funds. When I started, I think we were around 1,500, give or take. Again, it depends a little bit how you count contractors and full-time employees. And at this point, we're down to maybe a little less than 1,500. But yeah, at this point, we're down to roughly under 1,300. So in terms of RIFs themselves, we haven't had one at the FCC. I believe at this point, the FCC has been added to litigation out in California that puts a stay in place on RIFs. So we'll see how that litigation plays out. But it's a general matter at this point. We've been matching up our workforce with the agency's needs. And again, we've come down very, very significantly. In fact, I think we're below the lowest number of FTEs, at least from the chart that I've seen in terms of the number of years that it goes back. And we're still churning out a tremendous amount of really good work product, at least before the shutdown. So I'm happy with where we are, but it's constantly an issue that we'll evaluate.
Hi, Chairman Monty Taylor, Com Daily. Commissioner Gomez and some of the advocates have questioned the evidence for what you guys are doing with the IPCS order. They're saying that some of those
I thought I heard
facilities.
hissing sound. I didn't know there
Yeah,
was
where's some
questioning.
hissing sounds?
I thought like
did
someone
hear those
got a
as well.
flat tire out there in the
Yeah.
audience, but.
They're saying some of those facilities, there's not a lot of evidence that those facilities paused their programs, and they're saying that you guys used insufficient data to come up with what you did. Do you have a response to those allegations of like insufficient evidence?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence on it. It's been put in the record. It's relied on by the FCC in our decisional document. And again, this is a sort of a first decision. We're committed to trying to move very quickly on the further notice piece. And again, if people want more evidence or they feel like there's evidence that's contrary to the evidence that was put in the record at this point, I'd encourage everybody, and I think Commissioner Trustee said this as well, to put your evidence in the record. And we'll make the decision then based on the record as it exists at that point. But we had, very sufficient, adequate evidence in the record at this point that we grounded this particular decision in. But again, if people have more or different, contradictory, please put it in the record and we'll give it all weight.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Barr with The Guardian. I ask about the media merger questions. So today.
You say that's like a rifle shot focus?
That's my thing.
Okay.
I cover media mostly.
All right. Any robocalls? Any interest?
I think they're interesting.
Okay.
But in terms of.
It's not your beat. It's not your beat.
But I
Okay.
know what you write about. So the question today, 2 or 3 part question. Would a sale of WBD?
I don't know if you're going to get past our media advisor, but you can give it a shot. You can give it a shot.
One large question.
All right, go.
One, would a sale of WBD to Paramount or Skydance or Paramount, Skydance or Comcast or another big company, they've talked about opening up a bidding process, but would a sale of WBD require FCC approval in any way or any FCC involvement?
I mean, look, I've not focused on, the rumor mills around those transactions, and in part for this reason, which is I'd be very surprised if there was an FCC role at all in that type of transaction. I mean, maybe they have some, cars licenses, some microwave licenses. I don't know if that would be enough, but I don't know the contours of any deal, who the buyer would be. It's not clear to me that there's, sufficient FCC licenses there to bring that before us where I'd have a view. I mean, if I'm wrong, someone can tell me, but at this point, it's not clear to me that there's any FCC role there at all.
Do you have any personal feelings about whether a merger of WBD and Paramount would be in the consumer?
Personal
interest?
feelings or
Yeah.
official feelings?
Personal and official.
No, I have no feelings to share, at least.
Okay. I mean, it was reported that the Trump administration prefers the David Ellison bid, but I don't know if you have thoughts about it.
I don't, again, given that I don't think it's going to come before us, I haven't spent a lot of time
Okay.
with that one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Ted Johnson from Deadline. First of all, this
Also a
is Mary-
robocall,
Not a robocall question.
Okay.
But this is Mary Tompkins. She's a journalism student at University of Maryland. So
Great, good to
she's
see you.
here, shadowing.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
My question is, refers to something that Commissioner Gomez raised at the last meeting, as well as others have raised. And this is that you've been making warnings to broadcasters, yet you're not taking any action that would risk an adverse legal ruling for example, a fine or a license revocation. What is your response to that?
Would you like to see some fines?
Well, I guess that's their point, is that Commissioner Gomez, you said
Well, look-
the threat is the point, in that the FCC hasn't carried some of these warnings over to an actual fine where they could be challenged in court.
We may very well get there. I mean, again, remember, we've got a number of investigations that are underway right now. We have investigations going into NPR and PBS member stations as to whether or not they've been running commercial advertisements rather than permissible identifications. We have DEI inquiries going on a number of providers right now. We have sought comment on complaints that have been filed under various FCC rules that have to do with broadcasters. And again, remember where we are in the process here, which is we're 10 months in at this point. Again, we have a number of investigations that are underway. We are getting documents and information back. And so when you look at how you sort of run these things, I'm not sure that there would be sort of enforcement action that would have proceeded to a official document at this point in time. But we may very well get back there. And I would say that the threat is not the point. I guess I'm a little confused by that, because the point is the public interest standard, right? And the point is that the FCC should be enforcing the public interest standard. That's not a threat. That's just something that Congress has asked us to do. And I don't think, as I've said, I think from this podium in a lot of places over time, I don't think that's something that the FCC has done. If it comes to an enforcement action, then I'm totally comfortable with that. If people are abiding by the public interest standard otherwise without that, then that's fine as well.
When you first came in, just in the first weeks after you became chairman, you revived complaints from the Center for American Rights against CBS, ABC, and NBC stations. Why have you not acted on those complaints so far?
Well, we might. That was one of the complaints that I indicated earlier, that when you look at where we are, 10 months in, and you're developing a record, and you're looking at all the facts, you're weighing the record as it develops, we may move forward with that. We may not. We haven't made a decision there. Again, 10 months in, I think we're at an appropriate place with the number of sort of investigations and the complaints that we have sought public comment on. But we'll see. We may.
Next few months, do you anticipate something?
We haven't made a decision. We haven't made a final decision on the merits of that one yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Wesley Brown with MLEX. On the topic of Nexstar, Tegna, and like the national TV ownership cap, is it your belief that the FCC would be able to make changes without congressional approval? And have you felt some support from the congressional side or the administration in wanting to make changes to the ownership cap?
Look, I think it's been not sort of my view alone, or even my view. I think it's been a bipartisan view. Going back to Chairman Wheeler, the FCC, including a majority of Democrats, voted in favor of the view that the ownership cap is a rule-based cap, not a statutory cap. And as a rule-based cap, it can be modified by the FCC. That's been a bipartisan position of FCC commissioners. I've not made a final decision in those proceedings. We're still looking at the record. But, I'm open-minded to, agreeing with where Democrats have been, that it's a rule-based cap and can be changed by the FCC, again, based on the right record. And we'll look at that, but I'm open-minded to that view.
Thanks, Chairman Carr. Dave Shepherdson from Reuters. First, just to follow up, you have not yet opened those other complaints you revived for public comment, right? Is just the CBS one open for public comment? Is that right?
I believe it's just that one, but I can check.
Are you considering opening those others for public comment as well?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Can I just ask about China broadly? Back in January, you criticized the prior FCC's reaction to Salt Typhoon. Can you sort of talk more broadly about your approach to China? You've taken a number of actions, whether it's electronics, this recent action about the Hong Kong carrier revoking their 214 authorization, on the maybe tightening some of the restrictions as to the covered list. Can you sort of speak to your thoughts about where the FCC is in terms of addressing concerns about China, and specifically as to Salt Typhoon?
Look, I think in many ways it's a continuation. There's a real through line. I think where things did change directionally, I think was under Chairman Pai. I I think Chairwoman Rosenworcel largely continued and in some ways extended a lot of those efforts. I think we're sort of continuing to build on that. I think you indicated one area where, I parted ways with Chairwoman Rosenworcel, which was on a declaratory ruling that she issued in, I believe it was January of 2025, post sort of Penn's shutdown, that gave a, really novel and in my view, as at the time, erroneous interpretation to CALEA. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing things on cybersecurity. But one of the things that we've done right from the start is we stood up a new Council on National Security here at the FCC. One thing that they've been doing, that we've been doing, is we've been working directly with carriers to improve their best practices when it comes to cybersecurity defenses, including things like Salt Typhoon. And I think that's a much better approach than the one sort of adopted at the 11th hour by the prior FCC. I think the CALEA-based approach that was issued at the last minute suffered from several flaws. Again, one, I think was plainly illegal. The CALEA has a very narrow provision that talks about having to require access for law enforcement inside a wire center, and somehow the FCC read that as a provision that authorized us to adopt sort of untethered cybersecurity standards across every single portion of the network. That's just not what the statute allowed. And so I think adopting cybersecurity standards built on an unlawful reading of a statute does not put us in any stronger position. And again, I'm not sure the specific rules adopted there were really targeted at the threat. I think the best approach, and frankly, this is something that I heard from career NatSec officials during the last administration, was that sort of having a rigid rule-based approach to cybersecurity didn't necessarily put us or the carriers in the most nimble position possible to respond. So again, what we've done is we've pushed the carriers over the course of the last several months to strengthen their best practices and their approaches to cybersecurity defenses. And I think that puts us in a much stronger position as compared to the prior approach. But again, maybe other than that CALEA decision where I parted ways with the chair, I think there's been a lot of consistency. And again, if anything, we're just further expanding. The whole idea of the council was pulling together resources from across the agency. Since NatSec is not siloed in public safety anymore, we need it everywhere. So we also stood up a new national security advisor to me in the chairman's office. I think that's been helpful to have someone who's like solely focused on that and make sure it stays front of mind for me and make sure that we're constantly moving items that advance that agenda.
Just back on Salt Typhoon, this was one of the most significant attacks on U.S. telecom companies.
Yeah.
Massive exposure of data, prominent folks and others. Do you think the industry is in a better position? Do you have a level of confidence that that type of attack is less likely today, or that there are provisions in place to prevent one?
Well, look, I think the Salt Typhoon attack, in terms of its level of success, is not something that ever should have happened. We have to remain constantly vigilant. Again, I think the work that we've done with carriers to strengthen their approaches puts us in a much better position than we were then. Obviously, the goal is to prevent, to stop these attacks. If the attacks do happen, to mitigate them and eradicate the threat as quickly as possible. When you're dealing with something like the sophistication of cyber attacks, I'm not able to stand up here and tell you, with specificity, what percentage more secure are we compared to then. But what I can tell you is that the best practices and the steps that the targeted providers are taking today, in my view, are much better than the posture they had when Salt Typhoon first started happening.
Dwight Weingarten, reporter with FTC Watch.
FTC?
FTC.
Hey, buddy, you're in the wrong building. I'm sorry to tell you this.
Well, there's overlap with regards to robocalls.
Okay,
and
that's
so
fair.
I want
All
to
right,
ask
you can stay. You can stay. I'll allow it.
About that specifically. In 2003, the FCC's company-specific do not call rules were described as complementary to the FTC's National Do Not Call Registry. Has that relationship changed in your view?
Look, I think as I indicated in my statement, there's lots of federal agencies that are working on this. The Federal Trade Commission and Chairman Ferguson, they're doing really, really good work in this space. I think when he testified earlier this year in Congress, he walked through in detail a lot of the concrete steps that he was taking at his agency. We obviously are continuing to work very closely with the FTC. This is a it will take all of us type of approach, states, Congress, other federal agencies. And I think we have a great collaborative approach with the FTC as a general matter, including on robocalls. I think when you see the item come out, there may be some edits to the item as well that may be relevant to this question, but we'll wait for the red lines to come out. But I think we're really closely aligned with the FTC on these issues.
Thank you.
Hi, Chairman. Kelsey Griffiths with Bloomberg News. I want to go back to the merger review question. Nexstar and Tegna have both expressed a good deal of confidence that they will be able to close their merger by the second half of next year, but doing so relies obviously on getting rid of the 39% audience cap.
And filing the application too.
That as well.
Okay, that hasn't happened yet.
But I don't know if they can I don't know if they would necessarily file it until the FCC makes some signal that they are addressing the 39% rule. So I wanted to see if you could tell us, whether you've had any maybe conversations with these companies that would give them that confidence that that's going to happen, and maybe just generally, could you give us an update, a status update on where the review is since it was put out, I think, for public notice by the Bureau?
Yeah, so there's two or three things that are going on, right? There's, the public notice we put out on the national ownership cap. There's the quad that we've been working on, and there's the transaction that you referenced itself. The transaction hasn't been filed with us yet, and we're just continuing to assess the record. We're continuing to look at those issues. I think I've expressed, if not concrete views, I've sort of tried to convey my general thinking and approach on these issues over the course of years. But again, we have not reached a final decision at this point. We're just continuing to look at the record. We're continuing to analyze it. We'll see ultimately where things go in it.
When you say you've expressed concrete views, what are you referring to there specifically?
The concrete views that I've expressed in the past on this issue.
On the cap?
Like Google it. Yeah, I think I've talked generally about the cap, generally about the quad. I mean, look, I think as a general matter, a lot of these regulations are really sort of backwards looking, and putting aside whether they make sense today, there's a lot of changes that are happening in the marketplace that are relevant to those specific regulations, and we need to take that into account. And we'll see ultimately where we go with our decisions on this.
Do you think we'll see something by the end of the year?
I don't know. I mean, look, again, we're shut down right now. With respect to the transaction in particular, I wouldn't expect anything this year. It hasn't been filed yet. But we'll see where things go. We haven't made a final decision on the merits or on timing at this point.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thanks. Thanks, all. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Chairman. We're now going to move on to the Bureau press conference. So with 9 items, we'll get started. I'm going to mainly keep the regular order, but I'm going to group some of the items by Bureau so they don't have to come up and then go back, et cetera. So first, are there any questions on the space items for today, items number 1 and 2? Going once? No? Okay. Next, we'll move on to the equipment authorization item. Are there any questions on this item? Okay, strike 3. Next, Gen TV from the Media Bureau. Do we have any questions on that? Yes. Okay, Monty, give me 1 second here. Aaron? Can let her off the hook.
Yeah, Aaron, Monty Taylor, Daily. Commissioner Gomez said that she had asked for the inclusion of questions about it sounded like alternative ways to pay for people getting devices and stuff. Can you talk about what questions were added per her request to the thing?
Yeah, she had a number of additional questions that she added to, particularly the sections where we have made tentative conclusions to try to suss out a little bit more of the data about devices that are out there and the numbers surrounding that, as well as some other similar types of questions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All good on that item? Okay, we're going to move on to the Wireline Competition Bureau items, which would be IP interconnection and the IPCS item. Do we have any questions on this? Okay, so if the WCB team could come up. Thank you.
Hi, Monty. I'm sure this is about IP interconnection.
No, it's about IPCS.
Yeah, I figured.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. Yeah, Commissioner Gomez brought up an item on a bit about inflation that had been added to the IPCS item. She said at the last minute. Could you talk a little more about that and say when that was added?
Sure. Inflation adjustments are routine, par for the course in any rate setting proceeding like this. They've been done in previous IPCS or ICS proceedings. It was added while the commissioners were deliberating in Sunshine, although I think it had been placed in the record prior to that. So it is in the record in ECFS, and I believe the inflation factor was adjusted down actually from what was requested. It's about half that.
She suggested there was something unusual about the way that was
She highlighted that there was no productivity factor included, which has often been done in things like BDS, Business Data Services, Special Access. We have no data available to do a similar exercise for IPCS. And again, that just allows me to underscore that these are interim rates. And one thing that this item does is accelerate the time frame for completing, on a rather aggressive basis, the next mandatory data collection so that we could do permanent rates.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions on these items?
Thanks.
Nope. All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau items on broadband labels and call branding. Any questions on these? Monty's shaking his head. Okay, anybody? Okay. And last but not least, our delete item from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Do we have any questions on that item? Oh, Monty, throwing me off. Hold on one second. Just never know where you're going to go. Keep me agile, I know.
Hi.
Yeah, Commissioner Gomez talked about a couple of errors that were identified or items that some people objected to being eliminated at the last minute. Could you talk about those? And were they taken out of the final DFR?
Yeah, so there were a couple of ex partes that were filed in the record where folks took a look at rules that compared to other rules in terms of whether they're duplicative and raised issues about whether they are in fact fully duplicative or not. So out of an abundance of caution, we removed those from the direct final rule. One was related to, I believe, broadcast auxiliary service. The other one was, I think, a spectrum leasing rule, and they were sort of instances where we were comparing one rule to another rule that was on the books and looking at whether it was fully duplicative or not, and they raised some questions about whether, in fact, it was fully duplicative or whether there was something unique about that rule that wasn't covered in the rule that we were leaving retained, and so we just decided not to include it in a couple of cases.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? No? Okay, with that, we'll conclude the Bureau press conference. I'm going to hand this off to Commissioner Gomez, who will be here for her press conference, and thank you so much for coming.
Hello. Good afternoon. It's been a long meeting, so glad to see you here. You'd imagine that the work that the agency does would slow down while the government is closed, but the opposite happened for this meeting. Instead of focusing on only absolutely necessary items, the FCC voted on a whopping 9 items today. This is the most items I have voted on in a single meeting since I became a commissioner. 9 items is a lot of work for a small team to handle at a meeting. But what made the decision to pad the FCC's agenda during a government shutdown even more outrageous is that most of my staff is furloughed. My decades of experience in telecom policy helped me to keep up with the wide array of substantive subjects we covered at this month's meeting, but not having a full staff was like playing volleyball, one hand tied behind my back. You have to be really good at spiking. But I was not the only one playing at a disadvantage. Stakeholders were affected as well. Stakeholders were confused on whether the commissioners were still taking meetings to discuss the items. That is why I took to social media to let them know that I was and the deadline for sunshine. They didn't know who to reach out to because they knew staff was furloughed. I was even asked if the meeting was still taking place and still open to the public, a logical question since the government at large is closed. While overloading the agency's agenda during government shutdown and providing no guidance to stakeholders about how to still reach decision makers is concerning enough, even more concerning was the theme that this month's agenda initially displayed. Based on the drafts initially circulated, this was set up to be the most anti-consumer agenda ever put forth during my time as a commissioner. And that was really troubling. Cloaked by a government shutdown, the FCC was set to propose a slew of anti-consumer measures in the name of deleting regulations. What was on the chopping block? Various rules that we have implemented explicitly to protect consumers from unauthorized calls. For example, the rule requiring a company to maintain a company-specific do not call list. Unchecked, this FCC would have deleted this protection for consumers. And the rule requiring robocallers to provide an automated message allowing a consumer to opt out of a robocall. I worked to negotiate with the chair to remove this piece, and I'm glad to have succeeded in retaining rules that help consumers. But as you witnessed from our meeting, many proposals that I believe will end up hurting consumers were approved today. The broadband labels NPRM alone proposes to delete 6 measures that increase transparency for consumers. Many of these proposals lack a full explanation as to why they are unnecessary and an analysis on the potential harms to consumers. For example, the proposal to eliminate the requirement to display the broadband label in a language other than English, which only applies to providers that market their services in languages other than English, was adopted without explaining why this is logical, necessary, or at least not harmful to consumers. As it has become customary at every meeting, we have yet another direct final rule designed to remove rules and regulations in bulk without providing sufficient time for public review, apparently motivated by adding to the administration's tally of deleted rules. This time, the Commission sought to delete 398 wireless rules, and 2 well-sourced trade associations pointed out 2 errors, so now the rule seeks to remove 396 rules. I continue to worry about what rules are escaping thorough review because this Commission insists on expediting the elimination of rules. Finally, in an indefensible decision, the Commission today re-established higher rates that families of incarcerated people pay for phone and video calls. This is downright devoid of compassion. Not only does the Commission inflate the rates by incorporating additional categories of expenses that IPCS providers can recover, which we had previously determined have no relation to the calls themselves, but it also adds a 2-cent additive on top of an already high rate for facilities without the data to justify it. It also implements a 6.7% inflation factor without proper notice, a balancing productivity factor, and again, without data. All of this results in significantly higher rates that almost double in some facilities. And what is mind-boggling about this revision of the rates is that in the very order we claim that we do not have sufficient data to make permanent decisions. But rather than take a measured approach, we say we take a conservative approach that results in the Commission giving monopoly companies everything they want and more. I'm not sure the Commission understands the meaning of the word conservative when it comes to allowing expenses because it does the exact opposite in this case. All the while, pushing a framework that hurts families now. As I said in my various remarks, the FCC turned October into the launch of the anti-consumer agenda. Under the cover of a shutdown with limited staff, a confused public, and an overloaded agenda, the FCC pushed to pass the most anti-consumer items it has approved yet. I'll take your questions now.
Hi, Commissioner Gomez.
Hey.
Just wanted to ask about the direct final rule process. You had indicated that you had requested 45 days instead of what has been given here,
20.
instead of 20. What kind of feedback did you get from that? And I also wanted to ask if you're aware of any conclusions by the staff that there have been any significant adverse comments in the previous rounds.
I'll answer the second question first. I have not heard that, so I don't know. And the first was, my request was declined. But that's all it was just declined.
With no commentary?
Yeah.
Yeah, Monty Taylor, Com Daily. Is this the most dissents you have done? Is this the most dissenting?
I think so.
Feels like it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I suppose if we had to do a relative analysis, given the number of items. but
Yeah, makes sense.
I do believe in sheer numbers, yes.
Commissioner Ted Johnson from Deadline. The chairman just said he doesn't believe that there is any role for the FCC in reviewing a acquisition by any company of Warner Brothers Discovery. Do you agree with that? And also, Paramount this week is planning on substantial layoffs, about 2,000 people. Do you have concerns about that?
With regard to Warner Brothers, I don't believe there's licenses at issue to be transferred. So I'm not, obviously, not having seen anything before me, I don't know exactly what the facts are on it. It's not even clear who the buyer is at this point. But in any event, if there's no licenses to transfer, then there's no authorization to transfer those licenses, because as I would remind you, that is the basis for us reviewing these types of transactions. Which is why when we look at harms, we look at the costs and benefits of the transfer, not at other things like the content of broadcasts. With regard to the layoffs at Paramount, I mean, as I've made very clear, I really support local broadcasters, and I really worry about the creation of news deserts in local communities by the loss of newspapers, by the loss of public media, which have now lost the funding, the public funding for that, and by, I don't know what we're gonna see. I don't know who's gonna be laid off in these layoffs, but I just hope that it's not local journalism that suffers from it.
Commissioner Dave Shepardson from Reuters. Can I just ask, following up on another question about the 39% ownership cap and the FCC opening that up to refresh the record in June? Do you have any thoughts sort of about that idea in relation to this pending transaction? Obviously, it hasn't been filed before the commission yet. And there was a letter, I think, from Congress last week that you may have also gotten that raised concerns about lifting the ownership cap and how it might affect the diversity of voices in certain markets.
So the 39% ownership cap is set by statute. I don't believe the FCC has the authority or the ability to waive the number that is set in statute. So if we get a transaction that would surpass the ownership caps, I don't think we have the authority to grant it under the statute.
Dwight Weingarten with FTC Watch. Could you speak about the rules on robocalls that you negotiated to keep?
Did you say FTC?
FTC.
FTC Watch.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Here for robocall questions.
I was so busy listening to FTC, I missed the question, sorry.
I just asked if you could speak about the rules on robocalls that you negotiated to keep.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Yes, there were a few. One of those, as I mentioned, was the company that calls you, put me on your do not call list, and then have to do so. I believe these rules are complementary to the FTC's do not call list. And it's also encompasses more robocalls than the FTC list encompasses. So that one was important for me to keep in order to protect consumers. Trying to remember what the other ones were. We just talked about it. Opt out. So there was a question about revocation of an opt-out by consumers and whether that would in fact apply to an entire company or not. And we kept the rules as they stand. And also the any reasonable measure, any reasonable means requirement for opt-outs.
Thank you.
Actually, that's for opt-in, opt-out, opt-in. I'm confusing things. It's automated. Okay. I am confusing things. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Unless there's any other questions, I am going to call it a day. Everybody have lunch. Thank you.